The salinity of the oyster and the leftover salinity in the shell were just this perfect counterbalance to the Madeirized sherry-esque nutty flavors in the Madeira. And I wanted to hate it, Natalie. I really did. It was mind-blowing.
That is fascinating because we also typically associate oysters with Chablis or unoaked Chardonnay, and it's a fortified sweet wine. Madeira seems to be the last choice, but going to have to try it.
Out of the oyster shell.
Out of the oyster shell. That'd be nice because it'd be infused, as you said, with the salinity and the brininess of the oysters. So cool. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 133. Which weird food and wine pairings should you add to your must-try list? What makes wines from Oregon and California's Sierra Foothills so special? And how can you make sure that you're prepared to do well at a wine auction? You'll get those answers and more wine tips in my second chat with Scott Greenberg, host of the Vine Guy podcast, as well as the Wine of the Week show on WTOP radio in Washington, D.C. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but I hope you'll go back if you missed it after you finish this one. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of our conversation, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find me on Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m., including this evening and next week. And that's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/133. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show, a nifty trick I've been using lately is pouring wine from a full bottle into 2 clean half bottles. Why? Well, I'm glad you asked. It helps me track how much I've consumed and stay within the bounds of moderation, as I've defined them for myself. Each half bottle has approximately 2.5 glasses of wine. Now, that can vary depending on alcohol level, but it gives me a far better gauge than looking at the fill level in relation to a full bottle's label. It also keeps the second half of the wine fresh because it's reducing the oxygen exposure to the wine. Plus, when I drink it, I don't feel I've ripped myself off, as I often do when I've had just a little more than half of a full bottle the first time, and I'm more tempted than to open a second bottle. I've mentioned previously that alcoholism runs in my family, so I'm very conscious about my consumption. Sometimes I still drink more than I plan to, but, I'm a work in progress on a lot of things. How about you? Okay, on with the show.
And now I have 3 adult children who I've now converted into that philosophy. For example, being St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
We're having shepherd's pie tonight.
Nice.
And we are obsessing over what wine do you have with shepherd's pie. So it's going to be very interesting to see. I'm leaving it up to my kids to see where they come down on this.
Are there some candidates, or what would you suggest if you were in charge? Which wines would you be thinking of with shepherd's pie? Because it's got the either beef or lamb and then some vegetables and then that potato crust. So where would you go with that?
Well, particularly if it's lamb, I'm going to go to my old friend, Southern Rhone, back to Chateauneuf-du-Pape.
Yes.
Just because I think that's, for me, the most versatile wine I've got in my cellar.
Yep.
That's where I would go. I'm very curious to see what they choose.
Yes, indeed. That's fun. What are your most memorable wine and food pairings that you've had, if any, sort of stand out?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. There was one, again, it's a little self-deprecating because I kind of poo-pooed it and thought, what is this guy doing, right? Again, it was another one of those people who I was being introduced into their wine group. And we were at dinner. The first course was Seared Foie Gras. And this guy brings out a Sauterne. A Sauterne, Natalie? I mean, come on. Who drinks a sweet French Bordeaux wine with seared foie gras? I mean, yuck.
How does that work?
Yeah. What is this guy thinking? Well, turns out he's got a 6,000 bottle cellar and is probably one of the greatest palates I've ever known. He's just a remarkable person. And he just leans over and looks at me and he says, trust me, you're new at this.
Yep.
And that had to be probably the most memorable wine pairing simply because of the lesson I learned. And by the way, an amazing wine pairing.
And why do you think that pairing works? It is one of the classics of all time, but why do you think foie gras and Sauterne work so well together?
Well, now you tell me, Natalie. Where were you when I needed you? I think it's just because foie gras is so rich and fatty, and that the acidity that you find in a really well-made Sauterne that has to hold up to the sweetness in the wine, those residual sugars in the wine, that same acidity does a great job of cutting through that fat in the foie gras like a laser. And then you have that sweetness, which really, sort of also buoys up the richness as a counterbalance to the richness of the foie gras. And it's ethereal. It's ethereal. But more importantly, it was the lesson I learned that day that I don't know much.
You are very humble in admitting all of these stories. So I love it because that's what people can identify with. Okay, fine. That was the before times. All right.
Yeah, that's right. I used to be very humble.
And now you know what you're doing. But, I think there's so much richness in a dish like foie gras. And Sauterne can also be very intense. But when you're going back and forth between them or combining them in your mouth, you don't satiate out so quickly of either intense experience as you would if you were just eating foie gras or just drinking Sauterne. So I think that's one of the magical things about food pairing. So do you have any others, or a weird food wine pairing, or a bad one that didn't work? Any other sort of memorable matches?
Probably had a few bad ones that I'd probably rather not remember.
Okay.
And I also don't want to denigrate any particular wine.
Oh, sure.
So I've had my share of other memorable and, of course, not so memorable, or memorable for the wrong reasons.
Any unusual ones, weird ones that you thought why does this work?
Well, other than the Sauterne and the foie gras, which I thought was weird at the time, there's a very interesting sommelier, pretty well known, I think, among other sommeliers, named Eric Siegelbaum. And Eric was running the wine program for several restaurants when I ran across him. And we had ordered oysters on the half shell. And he brought out a Madeira, an aged Madeira. And, normally I would associate with raw oysters. I love Sancerre with raw oysters, probably one of my favorite things to have.
French Sauvignon Blanc or something like that.
Exactly. I love the French Sauvignon Blancs. And even the Chenin Blancs go, an older Chenin Blanc will go great with oysters. But a Madeira and
fortified wine. Yeah.
Here's what we're going to do. I'm like, okay. He said, you're going to shoot the oyster, and then I'm going to pour some Madeira into the oyster shell, and then you're going to drink the Madeira out of the oyster shell. Oh my God. It was amazing.
Really? Why did it work?
Amazing.
What did it taste like, first of all? What was going on?
The salinity of the oyster and the leftover salinity in the shell were just this perfect counterbalance to the sort of these, again, Madeirized, sherry-esque, nutty flavors in the Madeira. And I wanted to hate it, Natalie. I really did. I just wanted to turn to Eric and say, aha, you don't know everything. Again, it was just, it was mind-blowing. So probably the most unusual. I can contact Eric and ask him what the heck that Madeira was. I don't even know what it was, but it was just spectacular.
That is fascinating because we also typically associate oysters with Chablis or unoaked Chardonnay, and it's just a fortified sweet wine. Madeira seems to be the last choice, but Going to have to try it.
Out of the oyster shell.
Out of the oyster shell. That'd be nice because it'd be infused, as you said, with the salinity and the brininess of the oysters. So cool. Well, let's look at some photos. Let's see if
Oh, boy.
I can share my screen here.
Ah, yes. Aline Bailly of Chateau Coutet. That was at one of our Heart's Delight, at our black tie dinner of Heart's Delight. I probably should mention what started out as a one-night affair in my living room is now a three-night affair, a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night affair. And this is the Friday night affair where the Bordelais have a black tie dinner. This was meeting Aline Bailly.
Is she the owner, winemaker, or?
She is the heiress apparent. Her uncle is the current owner, and Eileen works there and will probably, hopefully, one day be running the joint.
Wow, fantastic. And who is this guest? And what did you learn from him? Her?
So really, I just want to ask you, I only put that in there, Natalie, because I wanted to know if this ass made me look big. Yeah. Or should I say
so I saw this and I thought, what a fun picture. I have to try to do that sometime. I love that.
This was on a bicycle trip through the Loire Valley. And we pulled into a tiny little village where we were going to have a wine tasting. And the first fellow I meet is this young man. And we decided to take a selfie together. And
wow. Did it turn out he was into wine?
No, he actually was more into hay.
Okay, that's great. And just for podcast listeners, we're looking at a donkey and Scott.
And Scott. Yes,
all
my
right.
big ass.
I love this. It's a funny pose. It's cute. You look relaxed.
This is my Burt Reynolds pose. This is from a couple of years ago on a barge trip that we actually took through Burgundy. And I am posing on the wall that separates me and other mortals from the vineyards of Domaine Romanée Conti.
Oh, yeah. That's stellar Burgundian wine. Wow. That's fantastic.
And what you didn't see behind me, Natalie, because I'm blocking the sign, is no trespassing.
Oh, yeah. Get off my lawn or my vineyard.
That's right. So I didn't trespass. I just only got up on the wall.
That's great. Is that the same place?
It is.
Yeah. Okay.
Same place.
The vines. Oh, here we go. And this, I love this. Wine expert. Any questions? And you circled your name tag. Where was this?
This was on a cruise ship from Australia to New Zealand. And literally just before the pandemic hit. This was the very end of 2019. It was December of 2019. And I had been invited on a cruise to lecture about wine. I've done this several times. As a matter of fact, Natalie, I'm going to take a quick break to tell you another fun story. I was on probably was one of my very first, where I was the wine expert, so to speak, on a cruise ship. And I had just finished, I can't even remember what the topic was. I think I had done a fun game called The Price is Right, where I had several members who were on several cruisers or members, whatever passengers, come up and taste the wines. And we had wines at everybody's table, and everybody had to sort of put the wines in the order of the price. And then there was a prize if you could, get them in the right order. And it was a lot of fun. And at the very end, as people were leaving, I said, "Did you enjoy it?" You're shaking hands like kind of a reception line. "Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it." And one fellow, I said, "Did you enjoy this?" And I swear to you, he says, "Oh, it was really quite enjoyable, but you're no Natalie McLean." So I decided I was going to find out who Natalie McLean was. And that, Natalie, is when I did some research, found out who you were, and started following you. And I became a huge fan of yours. So
that was probably my uncle or somebody. He was a plant.
Well, he was Canadian.
There you go. See, we're all related up here. That can be a problem too when the DNA doesn't get enough variation. But anyway, that's
I know
funny.
Natalie McLean. I'll never forget that.
That's a great little tasting technique of getting people to put them in the order, the price in the order. Did you give them any tips like were they surprised, or did you say, well, here's how you can recognize a wine that's more expensive than another one, like when you're tasting them without knowing?
Sure. We kind of did like a brief 10, 15-minute, here's how you taste wine, here's how you smell wine, this is what you look for in a wine. This kind of is a delineation between what we would consider an expensive wine and an inexpensive wine. But at the end of the day, it's just, what do you like? And I will say that easily half the people in the audience liked some of the less expensive wines over
That's
the
a
more
great
expensive
thing.
wines. And I thought that was a really cool thing that came out of it. But out of, I believe we had 50 or 55 participants in this, one person got the order right and they just guessed.
Wow. I always love discovering I like the cheap wine, because life can be both happy and
Right?
inexpensive, right? It's not a
Exactly.
sign of evolution just because you like the expensive stuff.
There's some good inexpensive stuff out there.
Exactly, especially these days with improved technology and more competition and newer regions. So, is this, where is this?
It is, again, another wine cruise. And I think this actually, Natalie, may be the Price is Right, where I was told I was no Natalie McLean. And
Oh,
that's why I
dear.
put the picture in there, was to remind me of the
Okay,
story.
that's great. So, cruises, you enjoy doing them,
Love
obviously,
it.
the
Absolutely
tastings.
love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We try to do one every couple of years. And I've been very fortunate to be invited on as a guest.
The wine expert. That's fantastic. Cool. Let's see. I recognize, I think, one person in addition to you, but tell us who these people are.
Well, I'm going to blank on the fellow on my left, but the young woman on my right is Elaine, as you probably know, Elaine Chuka Brown, who's very, very well known in the wine industry here in America as kind of being an expert, particularly in California wines. And they were on the podcast. I believe we were talking about the wines of the Sierra Foothills, which was really pretty cool because I did not know a lot about that region at the time.
No, and you know what? I'm not that familiar with the Sierra Foothills either. What differentiates them, say, from Napa, Sonoma, or even Paso Robles? Like, what are we looking for in Sierra?
Absolutely, the altitude. They're growing wines at a much higher altitude, volcanic soils, and a lot of Zinfandel, a lot of Syrah, and very intense wines coming out of the Sierras. And also, I've had some really remarkable Petite Syrahs coming out of the Sierra Foothills. And again, I believe it's the El Dorado region of the Sierra Foothills. And I was not familiar with this wine region. And it was really a treat to have Elaine on the podcast and learn.
Huh, that's great. Let's see here. Oh, what are you doing here? Oh, this is the Heart's Delight. This is the fundraiser.
This is the Heart's Delight. Yeah, for several years, I was I guess, amateur auctioneer at Heart's Delight. We had some amazing auction items, just incredible trips and large format bottles and vineyard experiences and restaurant experiences, and it was a lot of fun. But I am truly, truly just an amateur. We had the pleasure, and still have the pleasure, of having Jamie Ritchie, who is the wine director at Sotheby's, come and join us. And he's been involved since year one.
That's great.
Since the very first year. He comes down from New York and spends the weekend with us, and he runs the auction. And it's just a delight to work with Jamie.
And do you have any favorite tips for doing well at an auction? Like if you're bidding, other than just come with a large checkbook?
Absolutely. Don't be the last in.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. That's right. I've heard set a budget, but of course you don't want that when it's for charity. So I guess it's all for a good cause.
I did actually end up bidding on a lot where I was the last bidder and ended up with a particular trip. And I turned to my wife and I said, "We won." She goes, "No, dear, we paid."
Where's the trip to?
Where was that trip to? Oregon. It was to Oregon. We had a wonderful trip to the Willamette Valley.
Nice. Yeah. Any standout wineries that you visited there in terms of memorable?
All of them. I got to say, there wasn't, and it was interesting because I had for many years kind of been not the biggest fan of Oregon Pinots, because I felt that Oregon at one point, at least early on in my career, and maybe early on in their career, was trying too hard to be something else. But somewhere along the line, Oregon wine growers and winemakers decided, you know what, we're going to make great wine with the grapes that we have. And I'm going to say that for me, that revelation occurred maybe about 20 years ago. And I think some of the Pinot Noirs coming out of Oregon are definitely some of the best domestic Pinot Noirs in the United States and can rival many on a worldwide stage. I just really adore Oregon Pinots.
What do you think's changed to make that? Just experience, or is there something more?
No, I think experience. I think a lot of the Oregon winemakers, and they are very collaborative. They are constantly communicating with each other. They're constantly sharing information and resources and equipment. And I think what they realized is rather than maybe try to make a Burgundian Pinot Noir, use the best techniques of Burgundy, but make a great Oregon Pinot Noir. And they range. I mean, there's over 7 different appellations now in the Willamette Valley, and they range quite dramatically, but I find them to all have a great balance. They have wonderful balance, is what they have in common.
The ultimate compliment for a wine. Everything comes together. And who's this?
Oh, that's Joel Aiken. He's a remarkable winemaker, has had an incredible career and made Beaulieu Vineyards for many, 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 many years, put Beaulieu Vineyards on the map. And it was just such a pleasure to have him on the podcast. Wonderful gentleman. He brought in a 78 Beaulieu Vineyards to try during the podcast. And
how was it?
It was delicious. But, older California Cabernets, you have to really kind of want to be prepared for them. They're not going to be those big, ripe, fruit-forward California Cabernet you might be used to. This was very gentle and just delightful and still charming. Just really a tribute to both Joel and the vineyard in California.
Oh, fantastic. Awesome. All right. So
that was a fun trip down memory lane.
Yeah, it was. You've got some great photos. I always love seeing those from folks. And so I just a few more questions because I really appreciate you taking this time, Scott.
Sure.
What's the best kind of wine advice you hear people give? Like aside from, try everything, pull corks. Is there any sort of wine tip or advice that you like to offer to people to help them in their wine appreciation?
Well, this is going to sound so trite. It's drink what you like. I mean, so many people. I mean, I have been at so many wine tastings where people have different palates, people have different tastes, and even judging wine. My fellow judges will look for something different in a wine than maybe I look for in a wine. But at the end of the day, just drink what you like. I don't care if it's, a $10 unoaked Chardonnay or a $1,000 California Cabernet from one of the cult vineyards. If it's really something that you enjoy it. I prefer my wines with food. Not everybody does. Some people just drink wine for the sake of drinking wine to relax at the end of the day. And that would be my one thing is drink what you like.
Awesome. And if you could share a bottle with anyone, living or dead, who would that be?
Oh, come on, Natalie. That's wow.
Yeah.
wasn't prepared for that one.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So share a bottle, living or dead, with anyone.
You could go with Thomas Jefferson, just throwing him in there if you wanted to fall to the father of American wine or whatever.
I think right now, given what we have all gone through with the global pandemic and I just feel like I would love to sit down with a bottle of 1995 Sassicaia with Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Oh, what a great choice. I love that.
I think that's who I'd like to share. I know he loves Italian wines.
Okay.
I've had the pleasure of meeting him just once at a restaurant where I shared a Barolo with him.
Oh, nice.
So I think if I could, that would be my fantasy.
Fantastic. So I get the Italian heritage. He likes Italian. But why the Sassicaia 95?
Because it was a spectacular vintage. I adore Super Tuscan wines, which for your listeners, as we know, are wines from the Tuscany region that are not necessarily Sangiovese, but have maybe other what they call international varieties blended in, mostly Cabernet Sauvignon. And I just adore the 95 Sassicaia, and I think he'd like it too.
What would you ask him?
What would I ask him? I don't think I would ask him anything. I think I would just tell him, dude, thanks. Thank you for everything.
Good enough. Yeah, you've done your job.
You've done your job. Here, have a glass.
Yeah, you probably need a drink or 3 by now. This is great, Scott. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
I just think that it's been a wonderful trip, and I've met the best people. I've even had wonderful clients that I've met through the wine world. And I just feel incredibly fortunate to have stumbled into this amazing path. And then, of course, meeting people like you. It's just been a genuine pleasure.
It has been for me as well, Scott. This has been a wonderful conversation. Where can we find you online?
Well, unfortunately, my current website is under repair, and that's vineguy.com. But all of my podcasts are located on Podcast One. Search Vine Guy.
Vine Guy. And can we also access them through wherever we get podcasts, like Apple or
Apple, absolutely.
Spotify,
Apple,
all the rest
Spotify,
of them.
Stitcher.
Yeah, the Vine Guy.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm across all, right. Vine
Perfect.
Guy, and yeah, they're a lot of fun. I do try to keep them to 30 minutes because my wife says that's the average time it takes to commute or treadmill.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Scott, thank you so much. And we'll have to continue this conversation and hopefully also someday in person.
Thanks, Natalie. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Scott Greenberg. Here are my takeaways. 1. I enjoyed the unusual wine and food pairings Scott suggested, and I can't wait to try several of them. 2. I like the way Scott differentiated the Pinot Noir from Oregon as well as the reds from California's Sierra Foothills. He also reminded me of the versatility of Chateauneuf-du-Pape wines. And 3, his tips on how to prepare for a wine auction are terrific. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of our conversation, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find me on Zoom, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube live video every Wednesday at 7 p.m., including this evening. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/133. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Emily Steckenborn, a Canadian who studied wine at Niagara College, UC Davis in California, and the Cordon Bleu and Université de Rennes fine dining and gastronomy program. She's also the wine consultant for China Eastern Airlines, and in 2019, she was chosen as one of the top 50 influencers in the global beverage industry by the International Wine and Spirits Competition. She joins me from Shanghai to talk about Chinese wine and the Chinese wine market. In the meantime, if you missed episode 106, go back and take a listen. I chat with Joel Gott of Joel Gott Wines in California about more weird and delicious pairings, especially when it comes to gourmet burgers. This man has an imagination. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite. Zinfandel just seems to be the ultimate classic hamburger wine.
I completely agree.
As he said, reaching for a wine, I think. But why do you think it works so well with burgers?
I mean, it's a great food wine. It's very similar to how Sauvignon Blanc is a great food wine. So with Zinfandel, what I find is it has this spice to it. Most of the time, food overpowers wine.
Yeah.
And so with the spice in Zinfandel, usually maybe a little teeny bit of residual sugar or a lot of sweet fruit, it stands up to all the flavors and the fats and salts in food.
Good explanation. If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the tips that Scott shared. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a Pinot Noir from Oregon, a Chateauneuf-du-Pape, or a Big Red from the Sierra Foothills. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.